She said I was too old, too wrinkled, too irrelevant to be in the family photos. Then she laughed and waved the photographer away like I was a stain on the lens. They all stood there, my son, my grandchildren, even my own husband's portrait on the easel, smiling for the camera, as if I wasn't right there in the same backyard I'd mowed and gardened and prayed in for 40 years. I had done their laundry, watched their babies, paid off their mortgage after my husband passed. But I was too old to be in the pictures. Too embarrassing. That was the moment I knew. Not only had I been erased from the frame, I had been erased from the family. So I turned around and I walked back into the house without a word. But silence doesn't mean surrender. What would you do if your own family asked you to step aside because your face didn't fit their image? Would you smile through it? Or would you reclaim your place without needing anyone's permission? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what would you have done if someone said, "You're too old to be in the photo," because I'm Martha Bellamy, and this is the story of how I disappeared from a family portrait only to reframe my legacy forever. My name is Martha Bellamy. I'm 67 years old, a retired school librarian widow of a man I loved for 42 years, and mother of one son, Daniel. I was born and raised in the small town of Hawthorne Ridge, the kind of place where neighbors wave from porches and everyone knows when someone plants a new tree. I lived in the same three-bedroom house on Maple Lane for nearly 5 decades. My husband, George, built the front porch with his own hands. I planted the lavender that still grows along the fence line. We didn't have much in the early years. George worked construction. I managed the local library and later helped run the school book fairs. But together we made something solid. We made home. When George passed away from a stroke, I was 58. That loss still hums in my bones every morning I wake up alone. Daniel and his wife Veronica insisted I move in with them for companionship and to make sure you're not lonely, Mum. But I wasn't lonely. I was grieving, and grief is not a weakness. Still, I agreed, because Daniel asked gently, and because Veronica, his new wife, smiled that wide, shiny smile and said I'd be part of the village helping raise their kids. That sounded beautiful. I believed her. The house they lived in just outside of town had been a stretch for them financially. I knew because I'd helped them with the down payment. Quietly. No ceremony. Just a wire transfer and a prayer. The house was large, 5 bedrooms, manicured lawn, a kitchen with an island and marble countertops. Veronica liked perfection. She liked presentation. Everything matched. And slowly I began to realize I didn't. She was never rude outright. No. Veronica was clever, polished. The kind of woman who makes cruelty look like clarity. "You're too helpful, Martha," she said once, laughing as I folded baby laundry. "You're spoiling us. I don't know how we'll ever function without you." And I smiled, not realizing back then that it was not a compliment, but a warning. Daniel, my only child, was busy working long hours in the tech world. He was a good boy, growing up shy, curious a reader. When he met Veronica at a business conference and brought her home, I saw the way his eyes lit up. She was bold, confident. She brought him out of his shell. But after I moved in, I noticed something else. He deferred to her more than he should have. He shrank when she scolded. And when I gently tried to ask about it, he brushed me off with a kiss on the cheek and a "Mom, everything's fine." So I stayed quiet. I cooked. I swept. I picked up toys. I attended every school play, every birthday. I tried to be useful, not overbearing. Present, but not in the way. I never expected to be thanked, but I didn't expect to be erased either. The day of the family photo shoot was Veronica's idea, of course. She arranged for a professional photographer, color-coordinated outfits for everyone, even bought matching beige and white dresses for the girls. She handed me a pale brown cardigan and said, "Maybe just wear this and stay in the background. We're going for a clean look." I nodded. I didn't want to cause a fuss, but what she said when the photographer lifted his camera would change everything, because it wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration, and it echoed louder than any shout. The first time it stung, it was subtle. I was setting the table for dinner, nothing fancy, just grilled salmon and mashed potatoes. Veronica walked in, glanced at the place settings, and quietly slid the silverware on my plate a few inches out of line. She didn't say a word, just smoothed the linen napkin like she was fixing something broken. I smiled half apologetically and continued plating the food. Grandma made her famous mashed potatoes, I chirped to the kids, trying to inject warmth into the air. The children, Olivia and Henry, cheered, and for a moment I felt like I belonged. But then Veronica sat down, looked at the food, and muttered under her breath, "Starch heavy again." Daniel didn't look up. He just swallowed a bite and asked how work was going for her. 2 weeks later, I folded the kids' laundry, fresh, warm, and neatly sorted. Veronica found me placing little socks into drawers and said, "You know it confuses the kids when you fold things your way. It's not helpful." "I'm sorry," I said instinctively. "I just thought—" "I know," she interrupted, smiling. "You're trying. I appreciate that. But it's important for them to know who's really in charge here." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I had done wrong. I had raised a child on far less. I had worked 2 jobs to put food on our table. Was I now a burden? It only escalated from there. At Olivia's birthday party, I offered to help hang the streamers. Veronica smiled sweetly and said, "Why don't you just sit and enjoy the show? You've done enough in your day. Let the young ones handle it." I laughed politely, but the word enough lingered in my chest like a bruise. Later, when the photographer came to snap a group picture, I stood beside Olivia instinctively. Veronica's hand slid gently against my elbow. "Actually, can you step out for just one shot? This one's just for the immediate family." I looked at her, then at Daniel. He didn't say a word, just adjusted Olivia's bow. I stepped aside. The photographer raised his lens. "Everyone say cheese." "Too old to join the family photos," Veronica whispered with a smile as I sat on the porch swing behind them, unheard, unseen. I blinked against the sting in my eyes. That night, Daniel kissed me on the forehead before bed and said, "You're amazing, Mom." I wanted to believe him, but the image of that photograph, me sitting in the background cardigan, too warm in the July heat, was already burned into my memory. It was no longer a question of being useful. It was now a question of being permitted to exist. And as the days unfolded, I began to realize that Veronica didn't want a grandmother for her children. She wanted a live-in ghost, one who cooked, cleaned, stayed quiet, and vanished when the camera appeared. But ghosts remember, and this one wasn't going to stay silent forever. It was the family's annual holiday dinner. We'd hosted it at our home for decades, turkey warm cider, polished silver, passed down through generations. But this year, Veronica had insisted it be held at a rented hall across town. "It's easier for the kids," she claimed. "Closer to Henry's soccer game, more spacious for everyone." I wasn't asked to cook, or decorate, or even bring the family's heirloom pumpkin pie recipe I had made every Thanksgiving since Daniel was 5. I still went early, dressed in my emerald green shawl that Walter, my late husband, had bought me for our 30th anniversary. I wore pearls and even had my hair styled, determined not to let her freeze me out again. As I entered the event hall with the small pie I'd made anyway, Veronica saw me. Her eyes dropped to the dish in my hand, then to my face. "Oh, you didn't get the text?" she asked. I blinked. "What text?" "We already have 3 pies. From the bakery. You didn't have to trouble yourself." She took the pie from my hands and handed it just like that to a server. Not even a glance. "No, thank you. Just disposal." I swallowed hard. "Where's my seat?" "Oh, we tried to call you too," she said lightly, waving a hand toward the back. "There wasn't space at the main table, but we set up a little nook for you with the kids' sitter and Mr. Granger from down the street." She pointed to a small table in the back near the kitchen doors. My name was written on a place card, misspelled. Aubrey, not Audrey. And instead of the family china, I had a paper plate. Everyone else was seated at one long table lined with candles, silverware, sparkling, gold-rimmed glasses. Daniel sat at the head, carving the turkey. Veronica beside him, laughing radiant in a new burgundy dress. No one noticed I hadn't joined until Olivia came running. "Grandma," she whispered, "why are you sitting way over here?" I smiled tightly. "So I can watch everyone better." She frowned and took my hand. "I want you at our table." Before I could speak, Veronica appeared and gently pulled Olivia away. "Sweetheart, let Grandma rest. She's more comfortable back here." And just like that, she was gone again. The final blow came during the toast. Daniel stood and raised his glass. "To family," he said, smiling, "and to Veronica for holding us all together." A round of applause. I raised my plastic cup and felt something inside me crack. I wasn't even a footnote in his speech. I had built this family, and now I was reduced to plastic cups and pie no one touched. I excused myself to the hallway, leaning against the wall, trying not to cry. That's when I took out my phone and called Grace. We hadn't spoken in years, but in that moment, I needed someone who remembered who I had been before I became invisible. "Grace," I whispered when she answered. "I think I've been erased." There was a long pause, then her voice steady. "Then it's time you picked up the pen, Audrey, and rewrote the story." After that dinner, something shifted inside me. I didn't cry when I got home. I didn't rage. I didn't beg to be seen. I just sat and listened to the silence of a house that once echoed with laughter, and life now quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock that Walter had repaired with his own hands. That night, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened Walter's old filing cabinet. It still smelled like him, cedar wood and pipe tobacco. I pulled out documents, property deeds, old bank statements, the original trust agreement we'd drawn up years ago to ensure our home would stay in the family in my name until I passed. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a newer copy, a rewritten version of the trust. Signed, but not by me. My signature had been traced. The pen pressure was all wrong. My name, Audrey L. Wilson, was suddenly Audrey M. Wilson. It was subtle, but clear someone had forged it. And the change. It granted Daniel joint control over the house effective immediately. I stared at it numb. This wasn't just emotional neglect anymore. This was financial erasure. I made copies, scanned every page, saved them to a password-protected drive. Then I called Grace again. "Do you still know that lawyer you used when you split assets from your brother's estate?" "I do," she said, "and I'll text you his number. Tonight." I thanked her, hung up, and then did something I hadn't done in months. I opened an old Facebook account. There was a photo from 3 years ago, me, Olivia, and Daniel in the garden, laughing with our hands covered in dirt. The caption read, "3 generations planting roots." I stared at it. Then I opened a new private album, titled it Evidence. Into it, I began uploading screenshots, voice memos, scans of paperwork, photos of the nook where I was made to sit, the misspelled name card, the paper plate. Then I started recording, quietly. my phone tucked in my apron, or sitting on the mantel while they talked. Snippets of Veronica saying things like, "She doesn't need to know about the house, just smile and hand her tea." Or Daniel, "If you want this to go smoothly, keep your mom out of it." Trust me, each moment was subtle, wrapped in politeness. But when stitched together, it painted a clear picture of strategic erasure. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing the truth. And during all of this, I said nothing. When Veronica told me to skip the family barbecue, I smiled and nodded. When Daniel said, "Maybe it's time we think about downsizing you, Mum," I simply replied, "Let me know what you have in mind." They thought I was shrinking, but really I was sharpening, and I was no longer afraid of being silent. I was using that silence as armor. They wouldn't hear me coming until I was ready to roar. It was Olivia's birthday that finally cracked the mask. She had just turned 10, bright-eyed, curious, and still innocent enough to tug at my sleeve and say, "Grandma, are you coming to the park with us after lunch?" I opened my mouth to say yes, but Veronica cut in. "Oh, Olivia!" She laughed lightly. "Today's just for our little family, remember?" She said it in front of everyone, Daniel, Olivia, and even a few of Veronica's colleagues who had stopped by with gifts. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but her eyes never met mine. Our little family. I wasn't even surprised anymore. I just smiled and said, "Of course, dear. Have a lovely time." But that night, as I sat alone at the dinner table with a leftover sandwich, I made a decision. I printed everything, every voice recording transcript, every financial record, the forged trust and photos of the events. I slid them into a manila folder. On the cover, I wrote in bold letters, "For Daniel." Read, carefully. I didn't wait for morning. I knocked on the master bedroom door. Veronica answered in a silk robe, hair wrapped in a towel. She arched an eyebrow. "Yes. Is Daniel inside?" "He's asleep. It's almost midnight. I think he'd want to see this," I said quietly, pushing the folder into her hands. Her smile twitched. "What is this?" "Truth," I said, unedited. And I walked away. The next morning was different. Daniel didn't come down for breakfast. Veronica did barely glancing at me, her jaw tight. Olivia asked where her daddy was, and her mother snapped, "He's working upstairs." By lunch, the silence was suffocating. Finally, around 3 p.m., Daniel called down, "Mom, can we talk?" I followed his voice to the study. He was sitting on the edge of the couch, the folder open in his lap. His eyes were red. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" he whispered. "I did," I said, my voice barely holding. "You just weren't listening." He looked down at the papers again. "This isn't your signature, is it?" I shook my head. "You know it's not." He rubbed his hands over his face. "She said it was just to make things smoother. Said you agreed. Said you were getting forgetful. That hit harder than anything. You believed that I asked." "I didn't want to," he admitted. "But she was always convincing." The air between us was heavy with the weight of years. "I tried to stay out of the way," I said. "I didn't want to cause waves, but I also didn't want to vanish." Daniel nodded slowly. "I need to make this right," he said. From the hallway, we heard a sharp voice, "Daniel." A word. Veronica stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "I hope you're not actually considering this circus." Daniel stood. "Veronica, this isn't a circus. This is fraud." Her face paled. "Excuse me?" "You lied," he said. "You forged her signature. You manipulated us for control." "I did what was best for this family," she snapped. "You said you wanted order structure." "I wanted respect," he exploded. Not deceit. A silence fell like a thunderclap. "I think you should leave," he said finally. Her jaw dropped. "You're choosing her over your wife." "I'm choosing truth over lies," he said. She turned to me, then cold fury in her eyes. "You think this makes you a hero?" You think Olivia's going to forget everything I've done for her? No, I said calmly. But she'll remember what I didn't do. I didn't cut anyone out. I didn't erase people. I showed up. Veronica stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. And Daniel, my son, who had once been the boy who brought me wildflowers from the backyard, stood still for a long while, the weight of it all finally pressing on his shoulders. I don't know how to fix this, he said. You don't have to, I replied. Just stop breaking what's left. By the following week, Veronica had packed a few suitcases and moved into a rental apartment on the other side of town. She called it a trial separation, though the expression on her face when she left said otherwise. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Because winning doesn't always feel like victory when it's born from pain. Daniel had started sleeping in the guest room, a quiet acknowledgement of the emotional debris left behind. He cooked Olivia's breakfast himself. He helped her with homework. But his eyes stayed heavy. As for me, I began making quiet changes of my own. First, I visited the family attorney, Mr. Collins, a grey-haired gentleman who still remembered Walter fondly. I handed him all the paperwork and asked for the house title to be reviewed and restored under the original terms. He glanced over the forged signature, then looked at me over his glasses. Would you like to press charges? I hesitated. No, I said finally. I just want my dignity returned. Then we'll fix this, he promised. Second, I called the bank and revoked every automatic transfer that had been feeding Veronica's boutique business, a monthly 5-figure gift Walter and I had extended years ago when she said she wanted to be a self-made woman. Then I closed the joint savings account Daniel and I had opened when he was 20 and gave him the courtesy of a quiet notice. I'm not cutting you off, I told him. I'm simply drawing boundaries. I understand, he said, and to his credit, he did. By the end of that month, the utilities and mortgage were again under my name. The lawn care service Veronica had insisted we hire was cancelled. I preferred mowing it myself anyway. But the biggest decision came when I sold off a piece of land Walter and I had bought years ago as a retirement plot. It hadn't been touched in decades. The buyer offered more than I expected. With that money, I did something no one saw coming. I put down a deposit on a small coastal cottage 2 hours away. A 1-story place with white shutters and a screened-in porch that caught the morning light. I didn't announce it. I just signed the papers and had the deed delivered to the house addressed to me. Veronica must have gotten word from someone because she showed up one afternoon unannounced. You bought a house? She asked, arms folded across her designer jacket. Yes, I replied, handing her a manila envelope. These are the documents proving that the house we live in now is fully mine again. You won't be receiving any more support payments. You can't just... I said softly but firmly. And I did. She narrowed her eyes. This is revenge. No, I said. This is balance. You're tearing this family apart. I stared at her for a long moment. You cut me out of every moment, every photo, every memory that mattered. I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm just stepping out of the frame you built without me. Veronica left in a fury, but for the first time in years, I slept soundly, because silence when chosen, not forced, tastes like peace. The morning I moved into the cottage, the air smelled of salt and lavender. It wasn't large, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, but it was mine. No photographs had been stripped from the walls, no voices in the background telling me I was too old or too dramatic. Just birds and wind and the occasional bark of a neighbour's dog. I made tea in a chipped ceramic mug that had belonged to my mother, sat on the front porch with a blanket over my lap. The ocean wasn't visible, but I could hear it breathing beyond the trees. That was enough. Freedom doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it just sighs. In the first week, I did nothing but rest. Read old books. replied to letters I hadn't touched in years. I even reconnected with my college roommate Dolores, who lived 40 minutes inland and cried when I called. "Oh, honey," she said, "I always knew you were too golden to be buried in that house." She visited the next day, bringing fresh bread and older stories. We laughed like teenagers sitting on the floor with wine and memories. A few days later, I opened my sewing kit again. The same one I'd stored under the stairs in my old home, once pushed aside as if it didn't matter. My fingers trembled a bit, decades of dormancy, but the fabric still answered to me. Stitch by stitch, I rebuilt the world I'd lost. Word spread in town quickly. The woman who fixed hems and buttons for free in exchange for a cup of tea was back. One week, a woman brought in a christening gown that had belonged to her grandmother. I restored it. Another brought her wedding dress torn at the sleeve. "It's a long story," she whispered. "I understand," I said. By the end of the month, my kitchen counter was full of projects. My little cottage had become a quiet refuge for other women like me. Overlooked, rewritten, edited out of their own family albums. I never asked for their stories, but many told them anyway. And I listened. Because sometimes the greatest healing doesn't come from talking, but from being heard. And then one afternoon, Olivia showed up. She was taller, older, wearing a soft yellow dress. No one had told me she was coming. She walked through the gate like it was still her childhood playground, and looked at me with eyes too heavy for a girl that young. "I found your address in Dad's desk," she said. He didn't know I took it. I couldn't speak. "I missed you." I pulled her in without a word. We sat on the porch, the wind curling around us. She told me she was struggling, that things at home weren't the same, that her mother was trying, but the silence felt sharp. Then she said it. She told me I couldn't hang your picture on the wall, that it would confuse the family. I looked at her, my hand in hers. "You don't need a picture to remember love." We sat there for hours. That night, I added something new to my living room, a hand-stitched banner, the first I'd made since college. It read, "Presence doesn't fade just because someone tries to erase it." And for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not someone's burden, not someone's shadow, but a woman who had come back to life quietly, powerfully, completely. The week after Olivia's visit, I couldn't sleep. Her voice echoed in my ears, especially the part about the photo. It would confuse the family, her mother had said. As if my love, my presence, my role in Olivia's life was some outdated relic to be archived or erased. The quiet dignity I'd rebuilt began to quake beneath the weight of that sentence, Dolores noticed. Over coffee, she raised an eyebrow. "You're fidgeting again." "I'm thinking about justice or revenge." I stared at her. She leaned forward. "They're not always the same thing." I didn't answer, but she knew. She always did. That evening, I dug out the documents I'd hidden months ago. Property records, bank transfers, trust documents, old letters from Richard, my late husband. All the pieces that had once been buried beneath the control of my son and his wife. They thought I was too tired to fight. But they forgot that silence isn't surrender. By the end of the week, I'd spoken to an attorney. A young, sharp woman named Camille, who handled cases of elder exclusion and trust violations. Her expression hardened as she reviewed the files. "You're telling me they altered your husband's trust without notifying you?" I nodded, and moved funds into a joint account under their names. I was still in grief. I didn't notice. Camille pursed her lips. "We can challenge this, but it'll get messy." "I've spent years cleaning up their messes," I said. "One more won't break me." We filed the suit 3 days later. It made small ripples in the local paper. "Widow seeks restitution in trust dispute with son." The comments online were viciously divided. Why would a mother sue her own child? She must be bitter. She deserves her dignity back. They probably had reasons. But I didn't respond. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. I watched the fallout from afar. Mark, my son, called once. I let it go to voicemail. His tone cracked halfway through his message. I don't know what you're trying to prove. But Olivia cried all night. Is that what you want? I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because I was done being manipulated by guilt wrapped in family ties. A week later, a letter came in the mail. Handwritten. From Olivia. Grandma, Mom and Dad are upset. But I think you did the right thing. I wish you hadn't needed to do it. But I'm proud of you. I want to be brave like you someday. Love, Olivia. I held that note to my chest for hours. Still, some neighbors stopped greeting me. At the grocery store, I overheard a woman mutter, suing her own blood. Shameless. But others knocked on my door in the evening, quietly, hesitantly. Mrs. Greene, one whispered, I just wanted to say thank you. Another handed me a folded paper. Inside were copies of her own trust documents, asking, can you tell me if this looks fair? I'd become something unexpected, a quiet force others drew courage from. Was it too far? Maybe, maybe not. But sometimes a woman has to carve a space back for herself in a world that believes she should fade. Am I going too far? I asked Dolores once more. She smiled. No. You're finally going far enough. 3 months after the lawsuit was filed, I found myself walking the long path to my old neighborhood park, a place I hadn't visited since Richard passed. The maple trees were turning gold, and the air smelled like distant rain and familiar memories. I sat on the bench where we used to take Olivia when she was a toddler, back when laughter was easy and family meant unity, not survival. That morning I had received the final court ruling. I had won. The trust had been mishandled. My late husband's wishes were violated. The court ordered the property returned to my control and significant financial restitution to be paid out from the misappropriated accounts. There was no celebration, no streamers, just stillness and the quiet echo of justice. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply breathed deep, free. But the weight of everything still lingered. That afternoon, as I returned to Dolores's guest house, my temporary home since leaving, I heard a knock. Not rushed, not hostile, just tentative. I opened the door, and there she was, Olivia. She looked older than 16 now. Something about heartache does that to young people. Her eyes were red lips, trembling. Can I come in? She whispered. I stepped aside. We sat in silence for several minutes. She glanced around, taking in the tiny space that had been my refuge. Finally, she said, Mom's furious. Dad won't talk about anything. But I needed to see you. I nodded. I'm glad you did. I miss you. I swallowed hard. I miss you too, sweet girl. She reached into her coat pocket and handed me something small. A photo. It was from the family event 6 months ago, the one where they told me I was too old to be in the picture. But this version had been edited, cropped, reprinted, and glued onto it next to her was a cut-out image of me smiling from some old snapshot she must have found online or in a drawer. I put you back in, she said. That broke me. I clutched the photo, then her, as tears rolled down both our cheeks. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't stop them. I didn't know how. You're still a child, I whispered. But you're braver than all of them combined. We talked until the sun dipped low. About books. About Richard. About what she wanted to become, maybe a lawyer like the one who helped me. Before she left, she stood in the doorway and asked, Will you come to my graduation next spring? I hesitated, and then I nodded. I won't let them keep you away this time, she said. She left with the wind, and the silence afterward wasn't empty. It was peaceful. That night, I sat at my little writing desk and pulled out a fresh page. I wrote, I didn't choose exile, but I chose to not disappear. I chose to stand. I chose to be seen. I chose myself. The past can fracture us, but it can also sculpt us into something stronger. I closed the letter and placed it in a folder marked simply Legacy. My legacy wasn't just in money or property or family photographs. It was in resilience, in courage, in the simple act of saying no more. So if you ask me now, was it worth it? Yes, because I didn't fight for revenge. I fought not to be erased. And in doing so, I became someone my granddaughter could look up to. I am Margaret Greene, and I have returned, not to beg, not to plead, but to claim space in the story and the photograph in this life. Have you ever been told you were too old, too invisible, too much of a burden to be included in your own family's story? Have you ever stood in the doorway of your own home and realized you no longer belonged? Have you ever been erased quietly, subtly, until even your reflection felt like a ghost? If any of this resonated with you, if you saw yourself in Margaret Greene's silence, in her strength, in her decision to finally say no more, then I want to hear your story. Comment below, have you ever been pushed out of a family you helped build? Tell me your name and your city, because you are not invisible here. You are not too old. You are exactly the reason these stories must be told. And if you want to follow the next chapter, because yes, there is one subscribe to this channel, the next time someone tries to rewrite your legacy, you'll know you're not alone. You're not erased. You're seen. You're back.